wait a few minutes after our start time because there's folks that usually dial in late. But for some reason, GoToMeeting was experiencing technical difficulties, and we tried for the past 5 minutes to dial in, and it wasn't enabling us to do so. So it looks like we're all connected here. If you folks can just bear with us for 30 more seconds. I'm going to make sure that I'm sharing my screen, and we're going to make sure we're going to put you on mute here a second just to iron out a couple last details, and we'll be right back with you. Thank you. Okay, folks, we're back. Hopefully everybody can see our welcome screen, Transportation 101, Industry Terms and Coverages. Thanks again for joining, and again, we apologize for any of the technical difficulties. So again, my name is Todd Carrier, and I'm with Protective Insurance Company. Welcome to our webinar today. I have a few housekeeping items that I want to go over here before we get started. And first of all, throughout the presentation, everybody is going to be on mute. We're going to be recording today's session, and we want to make sure that everybody will have an opportunity to be able to view this webinar again in the future. Secondly, this webinar will last approximately 2 hours, and in between that, I know that's a lot of time to be on a webinar, but in between that time, we're going to have a 5-minute break. And what you want to do is submit a question at any time during the webinar using the navigation pane. You'll see a little orange arrow there. You can expand that out, and there's a place to submit questions at any time during the webinar. So we will be addressing all those questions at the end. And the reason for our 2-hour session is we want to offer CE credit, or continuing education credit units. And right now, if you're licensed in actually Indiana, Texas, we were not able to get in time, so I apologize, but Indiana, Wyoming, Florida, and Oklahoma, please make sure you provide your producer number, again, for those 4 states, Indiana, Wyoming, Florida, and Oklahoma. Put your producer number in the question chat box, and we'll be able to get you 2 hours of CE credits. So let's get started. I'm going to turn it over now to Charlie Hadley, who's going to go through our outline, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Good afternoon, folks. As Todd said, my name is Charles Hadley with Protective Insurance Baller Line Brokerage Services. What we're going to go through today is some transportation background in regards to transportation and some terminology in regards to that specific segment of the industry. So, kind of understanding here, quick go through the outline. We're going to talk about trucking insurance, the why behind trucking insurance, why it's important, the impact of that. We're going to talk about the economic impact, regulated industry. We're going to talk about the potential pool of clients. And some of those numbers will probably surprise you. I know they surprised me the first time I saw them. So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk about the language of the industry. Community is one of the biggest issues we have that you have to deal with. You have to make sure when you're talking to them, just like talking at a ball game or a bar or whatever, you need to make sure when you're asking them questions or talking about something with them that you use a term that they anticipate that or identify that in the same way you did. So the language of communication issues, we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about truckers, who they are, what I refer to as suspects and prospects. And then how do you market it? If you're on the sales side, what do you need to go through to properly and correct and most efficiently market this product? We're going to talk ideal potential clients, how to tailor your submission. We're going to talk a little bit about the ISO. Familiar with the ISO, either the motor carriers form or the business auto, you'll recognize some of these items. And then we're going to talk about applications, markets, forms, and then some of the current issues that you see in the transportation industry. Okay. That's me. I've been at the company, I've been with Bowman Alliance Protective Insurance for going on 33 years. Loss prevention, sales, ran the Sagamore for 16 years. So I don't know all the answers, even though I got a lot of initials behind my name. The only thing that means is I maybe have a better idea of where to go look for a question, an answer to a question, as opposed to somebody who says I know the answer. Because nobody in the insurance industry has all the answers. If you ever talk to anybody that says they know everything there is to know about the insurance industry, raise your hands up, put your hands over your ears, and run away from that person as fast as you possibly can. Because this industry is changing way too rapidly for that individual. So, after saying, let's get going. We're going to talk about trucking insurance. Just, if you would, on the webinar, 20 years of experience to you. 0, brand new, 1 to 3, 4 to 9, or are you a grizzled veteran of 10 plus years?
Okay. Hey, Charlie, I'm going to launch the poll right now. So let's see. I'm going to give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to close the poll. And let's publish the results. Charlie, we have about 19% that have 0 years.
Okay.
48% of the audience has 1 to 3. 14% 4 to 9, and 19% 10 plus. Okay. So we've got a pretty wide disparity here between level of understanding when you talk about transportation and the whole. Now, it's what I refer to as a semi-regulated industry. Prior to 1980, you had to have proof of need or proof of a requirement, an economic requirement, in order to have what you refer to as regulatory authority, operating authority. It limited the amount of individuals or entities that can enter into the transportation industry. That's back in the days of, your yellow freight roadway. Back in the day of the union shops, when they were almost like a oligopoly, a very small group of individuals
were granted authority and were operating in the transportation business. In 1980, that changed. If you had $750 and you can have an attorney file file a regulatory, if you had $750 and somebody would write your insurance, you could become a truck line. That changed in 1980. The idea was, made it easier for individuals to enter into the transportation industry, the idea of competition, increasing the amount of competition between truck lines. This is where you saw the rise of your independent owner-operator fleets. A lot of the fleets that you have nowadays, a lot of those, especially if they run exclusively independent contractors, owner-operators, started in the 90s out of West Independent part of Arkansas Best. Started as an independent fleet operator and grew into a company that was primarily built on independent owner-operators. Started in 1980. So you changed the economic impact. That changed dramatically in 1980. But I say it's semi-regulated because what happened, safety, even after 1980, still and to this day is still a primary concern of the transportation industry. Liability coverage, they require third-party coverage in order to be in the business. The vast majority of your transportation entities are a business to business. Most cases where the immediate user of that stuff being hauled is another business entity. Okay? So, gives you a bit of background about transportation. Here's the numbers that I was referring to. Real quick before we do them, everybody here, Rural Cal did 1980. Transportation industry is a huge segment of the economy. Based upon the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's registration of entities, there are 500,000 plus different trucking entities, 500 big truck lines and the little truck lines. 500,000 different trucking entities. 97% of those have 25 trucks or less. 97% of those are your small entrepreneurial operations. Those entities are going to be the ones that you're going to see that pretty much fit into the guidelines of the product and the policy form that we're going to talk about a little later. But 97% have 25 units or less. 90% of those operations are less than 6 trucks. As I said before, with the removal of the exclusive doctrine, now if you have 5 trucks, you can become a truck line. If you can come up the money and someone will write your insurance and you pay $750 for an attorney to file your operating authority with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, you are now a truck line. We know how many trucks are out there. There are 15.5 million commercial vehicles operating in the United States based upon the MCS 150, which is a form which is filed annually with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. 15.5 million commercial vehicles, of which 2 million of those or what we refer to as tractors, which is your bigger trucks, your Class 7, Class 8 vehicles, which is what you normally think of when you think of the J.B. Hunts or the Schneider big trucks, okay? So, when we talk about trucking insurance, only $2 million of all those things are those great big tractor trailers. You have a whole lot of other things which can qualify as transportation insurance, okay? Commercial vehicles, okay? Anybody surprised at the numbers? First time I looked at this, I went, whoa. So, there are a huge potential pool of clients. And if you think about it, what we refer to now as the medium fleet product, right there, the vast majority of those fall into that category, into the ISO motor carriers form. So, okay. Those are some of the details, some of the background. What we're going to get into now, we're going to talk about terminology, the language, the communication. When you're talking to a motor carrier client, when they start throwing in words out like bobtail deadhead, you're thinking, okay. I know the rock group. No, that's the wrong one. Wrong group. So, some of the language to make sure you're talking about this in the same way that they're talking. Language of the industry will be assisted, like I said, it helps you identify the needs of the trucker and talk to them in their language. Definitions. Auto. You'll see this, if you're familiar with the ISO Business Auto, a lot of these definitions are exactly the same. Okay. Auto, land motor vehicle, trailer, or semi-trailer designed for travel on public roads, and any other land vehicle subject to compulsory financial responsibility or motor vehicle law or licensed for garage. Easiest way to think about it, if it's got a plate on it, it qualifies as an auto. Brokerage, freight broker. It's an individual organization that arranges loads on behalf of the shipper. Majority of your owner-operators use brokers. These are arranged loads. Sometimes we refer to them as brokered loads. Example, you have a motor carrier that has 100 trucks, okay? He's got freight for 120. He's not going to turn the other 20 loads away. What's he going to do with those? He's going to set up some type of broker where he's going to say, all this for me, I'll become a broker, where somebody else is hauling that on their behalf. Okay? Brokerage, freight broker. We'll talk about that a little later. There are a different set of circumstances and requirements to be involved in the freight brokerage operations. Most of your larger carriers do have an in-house freight brokerage operation. Okay. Bobtail. Tractor operating without a trailer. The vast majority, if you think about it, it's a tractor with a trailer. You take the trailer away, it's just a bobtail. This goes back to the basis of a lot of the transportation industry, the agricultural heritage of the country, of the U.S. Think about it. If you have a cat, what happens? What do they call a cat without a tail? A lot of the folks grown up in their heritage, the people who started those organizations come from an agricultural background. So, the idea is bobtail. The tractor operating without a trailer. When I say tractors, they're private passenger auto. Okay? Backhaul. The hauler returns the trucker to their home base of operations. You haul freight from Indianapolis, Indiana to Cincinnati, Ohio. You want to come back to Indianapolis. From Cincinnati back to where you started is referred to as a backhaul. We talk about that and trying to figure out what kind of commodities go out, what kind of commodities come back. Bill of lading, an extremely important document in the transportation industry. It's a legal document that is utilized for the movement of cargo. It outlines and specifies the terms and conditions under which that motor carrier is moving that cargo for the shipper or the consignee. It's extremely important. One of the definitions you have to look on this is the bill of lading, when it may determine or may designate whether that commodity is what they refer to as free on board or free alongside. What we're trying to do is, okay, in the case of a claim, who owns the stuff in the truck? In the case of a claim, who's the motor carrier have to pay? That's what we're talking about, free on board, free alongside. This goes back to the old maritime days of the insurance industry, from starting with the Lloyd's of London, free on board. If the stuff is on the boat, once it goes on the boat, it belongs to the person it's going to, free on board. Free alongside means it still belongs to the shipper until it's delivered. Free alongside, free on the wharf where it's actually been delivered. Okay? So, those will be some of the conditions and terms that you'll find in the bill of lading. You will also find specified values. You find weights, release values may be indicated on the bill of lading. It is a legal document that is used, specifies the terms and conditions for the movement of freight under that contract. Bulk freight. I mean, it's unpackaged. Dump trucks haul bulk freight, dirt, sand, gravel. Anything that's not packaged qualifies as bulk freight. Can be a pneumatic tanker, could be oil, water, gasoline, whatever. Unpackaged freight. Cab. Section of the truck where the driver sits. Carrier. In relation to the transportation, you refer to those organizations and companies that use vehicles to perform transportation services for hire. We're talking about a carrier. We're talking about a truck line. Also, to 26 driver's license. That has one pound. All of the visitors, you have a Class C license. Class B commercial license is straight truck. The next there's a 26,001 pounds. This is your FedEx dump truck. Weight of 20 is those in long. Those are the guys that are going to get a W-2 endorsement, as opposed to independent owner operators, which we'll get to later. Consignees, the person to whom the freight is being sent to. That's the recipient of that stuff that's being transported by the truck. Okay, the consignee. CSA, Comprehensive Safety Accountability. It's the program that was implemented in 2010, CSA 2010, and has become a measurement for the FMCSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and the Department of Transportation to monitor and gauge the safe operations of the motor carrier industry. it's a great idea, but the implementation has left some things to be desired. There are some issues with that. And we'll talk about that a little later. But CSA, Comprehensive Safety Accountability, program implemented in 2010 to become a measure of the safe operations of those motor carriers involved. Deadhead, not the rock group. A haul that does not generate any revenue. Sometimes you'll find carriers and insurance companies that will refer to this as unladen miles. Okay, got an empty trailer, that's all he's doing. Not generating any revenue, non-revenue generating miles. DOT, Department of Transportation, 3 initials that strike fear into the heart of every trucker. DOT. They're responsible for the enforcement of the federal state regulations. Federal Military Safety Administration says you can only drive 70 hours in a week. Heaven forbid you're going to be riding box van. Doubles. For those folks who are riding, you see a lot of these now in the interstate. Doubles. It's a multi-configuration where you're hauling 2 28-foot smaller box trailers behind it, while the tractor pulling 2 semi-trailers in tandem connected by a converter dolly. You get into some of your limited access highways, depending upon where you're running, through northern Indiana, through the toll road, through and farther out west, you will see configurations where they're running 2 semi-trailers, one 53-foot, one 28-foot. You'll even see them running triples, what they refer to as 3 trailers back to back to back. But doubles, 2 trailers is what you primarily see in the Midwest. You see this a lot for entities that may be delivering freight into large metropolitan areas. They'll haul 2 doubles. They'll haul the doubles in Chicago, park one, and then take one of the trailers, smaller trailers, into downtown Chicago, where it's easier to maneuver as opposed to a 53. These in our particular area here, parts of the United States, not animal haulers, guys hauling cattle, pigs, chickens, fresh fruit, are what they're referred to as exempt. They don't have to follow some of the same regulations in regards to cargo, and to a lesser degree some of the regulations in regards to maintenance and those type of things on the units. Flatbed. It's exactly what it says. A trailer that has a side to the top. It's a piece of, it's a board on wheels. It's exactly what it is. Flatbed. You will see this in its whole specific types of freight. Are hauled using flatbeds. I guarantee you will never see any hauling ice flatbed. I have in those haulers. Out to the underwriter requirements, they'll ask for a little bit more specification. Okay. Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. This is the organization whose mission is to ensure safety in motor carrier operations and prevent commercial accidents. These are the people that set the rules and regulations that the DOT enforces. For those folks that have been in the industry that last 18%, 10 or more years, you may see some documents that refer to the ICC. That stands for the Interstate Commerce Commission, which is now the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. These are the folks that set the rules and regs. Fifth wheel, coupling device that is attached to a tractor, which supports the front semi-trailer and locks the tractor to the dolly. Gross vehicle weight, generally laden and its cargo. This is what they use to determine what kind of class CDL you have to have. Hazmat, hazardous materials as defined by the Environmental Protection Agency. Motor carrier and insurance companies do not decide what is hazmat and what is not. That is defined by the EPA. This material at some point. Milk, after it's spilled, we talked about the ice cream on the flatbeds, silly stuff melts, and all of a sudden you got on the side of the road, guess what? It's a hazardous material. So, transportation of those materials are strictly regulated and enforced by the Department of Transportation. You want to be on the DOT's radar, all stuff that I refer to goes boom or glows in the dark. Hazardous materials. Okay. But you do some of those. We have seen a time that had become when it came into the just-in-time philosophy, came into manufacturing. You see a lot of these. Those arrested specialize in the transportation of lightweight loads. In many cases, the trucks are nothing more than an oversized pickup truck. Folks that haul camper trailers, RVs. You see a lot of those that are basically hotshots that are utilized to transport lightweight loads. And like I said, the vast majority of the time it is an oversized pickup truck, okay, pulling a small trailer. IFTAs, IFTA, International Fuel Tax Agreement, sometimes referred to as your Schedule Bs for those folks that see those. State Tax Distribution System. This is the documentation that is utilized by underwriters to evidence where you're running, how many miles you're running in those particular states. So as miles traveled in each state, and as done, our underwriter will use this to document the miles you say you're running based upon your application. The operations, interstate, if you have interstate operating authority, that means that motor carrier is carrying freight across state lines, from Indiana to the Commonwealth of Kentucky, from Kentucky to Ohio. They're crossing state lines. That's interstate. Versus intrastate, the borders in the state of Texas, you can run 200,000 miles a year and never leave the state of Texas. In that case, you may get by with 100% intrastate authority. Or you may be like in Indiana, if you're running 200,000 miles a year, chances are you're running across state lines. Activity solely within the borders of the state is intrastate, interstate is across state lines. Intermodal, container hauling. You see these guys driving down the road where you got looks like the ribbed trailers with the Dole pineapple on the side. Those are trailers, that's an intermodal operation. Those are trailers that are involved in multiple modes of transportation. You may see them behind a truck, you may see them on a rail car, you may see them in an ocean-going vessel. Intermodal, containers that can be used in multiple modes of transportation. We've seen more and more, this seems to be a growing segment of the industry involved in intermodal operations. Lowboy, it's an open flatbed trailer with the deck so low to the ground that it accommodates some of what you may see going down the road as oversized loads. Construction equipment, heavy ground to clear the overpasses. Those are usually transported with what we refer to as a lowboy or drop deck trailer. Less than truckload, LTL. You'll hear the term LTL operations. Less than truckload. Quality of freight is less than required for one truckload. What we're talking about here is less than truckload operations. Those are entities that when the trucker fills up their truck in the morning, they will make multiple stops before they bring it back empty in that afternoon. When you talk about an operation that is an LTL, that means their daily operation is Roadway, Yellow Freight, FedEx, all those, Old Dominion, or all those type of operations where those trucks may make multiple stops in one given day. LTL, that's the easiest way to think about it. Owner-operator, this is sometimes referred to as an independent contractor. This is your 1099 employee. Excuse me, back up. This is your 1099. The individual that owns and drives their own truck. They are the entrepreneur. They're the contractor, which is leased onto an entity. Those folks are paid with a 1099. The easiest way to keep them separate, W-2, company drivers, contractors, 1099. Pup trailer we talked about before. You'll see these on doubles. Short summit trailer, sometimes between 26 and 32 feet long. You'll see these utilized in areas of large metropolitan concentrations. Radius of operations. Underwriters love this. Scope of operations, usually reflected in miles driven from a terminal to the point of delivery. One of the ISO rating criteria is radius of operations. How far are you driving one way to do what you do? Okay, the idea being, the farther you drive, the greater the exposure. So, radius of operations, usually reflected in miles driven from one terminal location to a point of delivery. If there's ever a question on here, remember I talked to you about that if there's a little earlier, and it indicates all the miles you drive in states? That is used to document radius of operations. Okay. Refrigerated vans, sometimes referred to as reefers. In the state of Colorado, Michigan, and some of our other states, that may take on a whole different meaning now. But reefer, refrigerated van, it's a trailer using the transportation of temperature-controlled freight. Can be meat, can be ice cream, can be anything, pharmaceuticals. Anything that has to be temperature-controlled is usually transported in a refrigerated van. The key is this is a box van that's insulated with a temperature-controlled unit on the front or the top. These are they can haul the same type of freight as they can in a dry van, in addition to temperature controlled. Truckload, you'll hear the term. We talked about less than truckload, now truckload. Truckload freight. Quantity of freight required to fill a truck. Easiest way to think about it, truckload operations. They load the truck, they pick it up, one stop. They're going to deliver the entire load in one place. That entire truckload goes to that entity. Less than truckload, multiple stops. Truckload, one stop. You will also hear the term drop and hook. Same thing. They're talking about a truckload operation. It's non-touch freight. They back the truck up, drop the trailer, and away they go. They're going to deliver that whole truckload of freight to one spot. Okay? Shipper. The entity that hires a transportation firm to move their freight. We talked about the stuff that the people that it's going to. This is the people that's sending it, the shipper. These are the ones that usually make the arrangement with the motor carrier, shippers. Straight truck. It can be a box truck or dump truck where the freight carrying compartment is attached to the power unit. It can be a single axle, dual axle, tri-axle. Some of your states even allow quad axle dump trucks. It's where the number of axles into the bed that's hauling the cargo. Tractor power unit. The unit that has no freight carrying capacity except for a connection device. This is what you'll hear return tractors and power unit. This is your class 7 and 8 stuff that are pulling trailers. Okay? Can be a cab over or conventional. The vast majority of what you see nowadays going down the road is what's referred to as a conventional tractor trailer. Conventional. That's where you've got the engine in front of where the driver sits. That's a conventional. Okay. So, definitions. There's a full library can be found in the Navigator under data governance terms and conditions. And at the end of this webinar, toward the back, we've got some pictures of some of this stuff in the appendix, which can further visually emphasize what we just went over, some of the definitions. All right, poll number 2.
Okay, Charlie, we're going to open up a quick quiz here. Everybody on your screen, please take this quiz. After reviewing these definitions, what does it mean to run deadhead? Please choose A, B, or C and D. What does it mean to run deadhead? I am going to close the poll in 5, 4, 2, and 1.
I want to know how many people put on your way to a Grateful Dead concert.
Okay, Charlie, we people actually answered Grateful Dead.
Okay.
97% said a haul that does not generate any revenue, unladen miles.
There you go.
Nice job, folks.
Okay.
All right, keep going.
All right. Definitions. If you understand the language, you have a better chance of understanding what that client or potential client is looking for. Okay. Talk a little bit here about truckers. Who are they? We talk about different types of what I refer to as suspects. We're talking about suspects. The idea is when you're talking to a client, everyone's a suspect. All that 500,000 plus are suspects. The key is to take them from a suspect to a prospect, from a prospect to a client. That's what we're trying to get. Suspects, types of carriers, private carriers. Those are the companies, motor carriers, that haul their own goods. Steelcase, Frito-Lay, Anheuser-Busch. Some of those folks have their own fleets that haul exclusively their own products. Those are private fleets. As opposed to for-hire carriers. Anybody will haul for the general public for a fee. Those are for-hire carriers. A lot of your private carriers have a foot in both worlds. They'll haul their own stuff out, and then on the back haul, coming from Cincinnati back to Indianapolis, they may be hauling somebody else's stuff. So they work both sides of the fence. Okay. Operating authority. This is what's filed with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration that allows them to participate. A contract carrier or a common carrier. Almost everybody used to be contract carrier, where you would haul freight based on the terms of a contract between you and the shipper. You still have the vast majority, a good number of those, but the vast majority of what we have out there now are referred to as common carriers, which means they'll haul for anybody based upon the rates that are filed. And if those individual shippers will pay the rates that are filed, they'll haul the freight for them. Within the next couple of years, you're going to see that differentiation go away. Well, there's no longer going to be a differentiation between contract and common. It's one of the things that you see coming in as a result of CSA and the MAP 21 came out in 2012. So those will eventually go away. Okay. Talked about suspects. And I remember when you're talking to a transportation entity that you want to take from a suspect to a prospect to client, how do I make them legal? If you answer that question, you're halfway there. If you have a non-filed risk, an entity that has no regulatory filings, it's a business auto. That's all it is. You handle it just like you would any other business auto. There are no requirements other than how much limits they want to buy and how much you can sell them. Okay, if it's a non-filed risk, there are really no required parameters. Okay, as opposed to filed risk, that's where you've got regulatory filings in place, where they've made a state and or federal filing. And here's what we're looking at. Regulatory filings have to do with third-party liability. Federal limits. If you are involved with the motor carrier industry and you are involved in interstate commerce, once again, hauling stuff across state lines, and that could be your trucks go across or the freight that you're hauling has gone across, you're required to have third-party liability. Depending upon the commodities that you're transporting, that could range from $750,000 to $5 million. Required limits based upon the information that are filed with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Now, how you evidence that, depending upon the motor carrier's form that you're utilizing, An MCS 90 is an endorsement to the policy that indicates this individual has X number of dollars of primary liability. That's an endorsement that has to be included in the policy. You'll see, and that is referred to on that a quote unquote BMC 91X. If you have an indemnification contract that's not the ISO policy, you use the 82, and MCS 82 becomes your proof of insurance, proof of financial responsibility. For those folks that ever get pulled over by the get pulled over by the local law enforcement agencies, they pull you over, and after you say, "What did I do, officer?" they're going to ask you for your insurance card and your registration, right? They're going to ask you for your driver's license and your registration. Driver's license to make sure you're qualified to drive the type of vehicle. Registration to prove you have proof of financial responsibility. That's what they're looking for. I'm with Allstate. I'm with State Farm. I'm with Progressive. Okay? That's what the MCS 90 and that MCS 82 are. Those are proofs of financial responsibility that must be kept with the policy when the Department of Transportation comes calling and asks for proof of financial responsibility. If you do not have that in-house, I think you get 24. I think it's 48 hours to produce it. Otherwise, then the clock starts ticking to the tune of $5,000 a day for a fine if you don't have it in-house. Okay. The other thing in federal, if you have a regulatory filing, policy automatically, that MCS 90 or the BM and MCS 82 automatically extends coverage to any vehicle owned, operated, used by the entity whose name appears on that filing, whether they're on the policy or not. The other thing about your fault, my fault, nobody's fault, you are required to give the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration X number of days prior notice before you can cancel a policy, in order to protect the motoring public, to make sure that those entities have the opportunity to replace that coverage. Okay? Liability, third-party liability. Always the idea behind protecting the motoring public. State, if you're all in intrastate operations only, you don't go outside of the state of Texas. $750,000, and in some cases, most states will defer and monitor or mirror what you're required to have with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. They have the same extension of coverage and notice requirements as the federal. Form E is what's referred to in most states in the ISO is what is required for the state authority. A Form E filing. There are some motor carriers that have both. Some state hauling hazardous materials in the state of Colorado, you have interstate authority. You got $5 million. Well, the state of Colorado still requires you to have a Form E on file with the state of Colorado. States will vary. I think there's about 14 states that still require you to have that on file, even though you've got interstate authority filed with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. They want that piece of paper to prove. Cargo used to be required on everything if you're a common carrier. That went away with two exceptions. BMC 34 or Form F, no longer required except for those carriers that are transporting hazardous materials or household goods. If you're a household goods mover, you're required to provide cargo coverage and a cargo filing, only in those situations. That's what's required to make them legal. Some of the additional coverages that we can offer, and you should offer with your motor carriers, but automatically, first-party physical damage coverage covers your stuff, the stuff that they own. It can either be original cost or actual cost new, or you could have a stated value endorsement. First-party physical damage is automatically included. We talked about additional coverage. Motor truck cargo is outside of the ISO motor carriers form, but it's a coverage which is normally bundled with the auto liability. Now, we talked about auto liability, we talked about cargo, we talked about physical damage. In most cases, truckers also require general liability coverage. The idea is to keep it with the same carrier, because in a situation you have an incident, is it auto liability, is it general liability? If you don't want to get into a finger pointing contest, make it with the same carrier. Then that question, the only two questions come up is which adjuster is going to handle it, which pocket's going to pay the damages. But they're going to get paid. General liability, protection for bodily injury and property damage claims arising from the premises and operations of a trucker, their completed operations, or the actions of someone working. In addition to your normal CGL stuff of personal injury, advertising, and liability. Guys, I have never, in my almost 40 years in the insurance industry, and I have been told that it cannot happen. You cannot have a loss which is an AL and GL loss at the same time. Reason being, under the commercial general liability policy, the very first exclusion for bodily injury and property damage is anything that has to do with wheels. So it's either an auto or a general in the case of a bodily injury or property damage. That's the reason why you keep it with the same carrier. Okay. Additional coverage is required. Workers' compensation or occupational accident for injuries, bodily injuries that result or that your employee or your contractor are injured in the course of their employment. Excess auto or excess general liability. For those entities that have a lot to protect, a lot of assets, excess coverage above and beyond what you may write in the primary. Other items you can offer. At this point, let's take our quick 5-minute break. Henning, Todd?
Perfect. Thanks, Charles. So it is exactly 3 o'clock Eastern, noon Pacific. We are going to take exactly a 5-minute break. We will resume promptly at 3:05 Eastern, 12:05 Pacific. So we will be right back. We'll put our phone on mute and we'll resume shortly. Thank you, folks.
Welcome back.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Just a couple reminders here before we resume. Number one is, again, if you would like CE credit for this 2-hour webinar, a couple things are required. Number one is you have to send via the chat pane or question box your producer number. Secondly, you actually have to be present and logged in for the entire duration of the webinar. This software, GoToWebinar, measures all that, and we have to submit the registration report to those 4 states that this is filed with for proof of your attendance. So if you leave early, it's entirely possible the state may not accept that credit. And then finally, as a reminder, please, as you think of things, comments, questions that you have throughout the second half here, make sure that you enter those in the question pane. Again, you have an orange arrow that you can click on your screen and type any question at any time during the webinar. And again, I will not be opening up the phones for comments. I will only be taking questions via that question chat pane. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Charles.
All right, welcome back, folks. We're going to get in here, but we're going to talk about now from the producer standpoint, how do you market the business? We're talking about, okay, we've gone through the definitions. We understand a little bit about the individual entity that you're talking about. But, okay, for those folks in the independent agency system, you have 2 of your biggest enemies. Number one, obviously, is competition. Number 2 is time. You don't have a lot of time to waste. And most times I've been told by agent producers, they really don't need to practice, submitting stuff. So we're going to try to give you some insight as to how you can get the biggest return on your investment from a time perspective. What makes sense? How do you market it? Tailor your submission to the needs of the client. Hey, I need somebody that's going to do this. This is based upon my exposure. This is what I need to address, okay? I have a bunch of independent owner-operators that haul flatbed, but yet I got a bunch of this over here. Tailor your submission to the needs of the client. Talk to the prospect. Develop a checklist. What do they do and how do they do it? What do they transport? Remember I talked about don't ever put FAK? What do they transport? Because it will have an impact to the underwriter. Also to the required limits of liability. So what do they haul? Where do they go? Do they have employees or are they contractors? All those are questions you need to ask. Okay. For those producers that are talking to the renewal clients, make sure to talk to them. Because the only thing you do is pull up the application from last year or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, things change. Companies change. So make sure that you've got updated information as to what that checklist should be. What do they do? How do they do it? What do they call? What do they haul? Where do they go? Employees and contractors. If all of a sudden they decide to go from a 50-unit fleet with company drivers to a 50-unit fleet of company drivers and a 150-unit fleet of contractors, that makes a difference. So always ask. Markets. Where do I go? What do I do? Match the market with the risk. I cannot emphasize this enough. Talk to your carriers. Some carriers really love refrigerated vans. Some carriers really love dump trucks. Others hate them. So if you've got a risk that is a refrigerated van operation, and this carrier has just knocked it out of the ballpark for intermodal and dump trucks, may not be the best fit for your refrigerated van operation. Match the risk to the market. Make sure the information is complete and accurate when you go through the submission. I like this last one. Make the underwriter your friend. Last thing you want to do is give them a reason to shuffle your submission down to the back to the bottom of the stack. Make sure it's complete and accurate when it comes in. Okay? Give them the information they need. Maybe nothing more than that, but give them the information they need to do their job. Okay? Make the underwriter your friend. Some of the things that they're going to require: application. Now, if you're using the ISO Accord application, that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. But if you're using, you have a carrier that has their own specific application, fill it out. Use that, because that application is an indication of what that carrier deems important. They have a reason for asking those questions. So, application, fill it out completely, especially if it's a carrier-specific application. Loss information. Underwriters like to look in the rearview mirror, and they believe in one very basic premise. Historical data, historical actions are an indication of future events unless you do something to change it. So, loss information. Detailed, complete loss information for those lines of insurance that you're going to write. Physical damage, if you're going to write auto loss, you're going to write liability and property and physical damage only, they may not want to see the cargo loss runs, but they're sure going to want to see the physical damage and liability loss runs. 3 years, I think most of the companies now want 5 years of historical losses. We've got excess carriers now that are requiring 10. The reason is the law of large numbers. The more data they have to utilize, the more confident they are in their rate that they're going to provide you. So make sure you give them the information they need to have a good profile that risk historical perspective. MVRs and accident history. Hey, in the case of a fleet, the exposure is the driver behind the wheel and the turns of that wheel that goes down the road. Motor vehicle records, accident history of the drivers. Most of the insurance carriers will run their own MVRs, but you have to provide them with the personal information necessary to order those motor vehicle reports. Little narrative, little business history. Give them a little. This is where you talk up the carrier. This outfit's been in existence for 30 years. They're one of the top carriers for ABC or whatever. Business history, a little bit of the reputation. The president of the company sits on the board of the National HEA and has now for the last 20 years. Okay. We used to joke around here about the fact we used to count the presidents of the American Trucking Association that we insured their truck lines. That's a reputation thing. What's the reputation in the industry? Credit standing. Everybody's going to ask for financials. That has become a proven indicator of potential exposures down the line. So we're going to want to know about their credit standing. Do they have the money to pay their drivers? Do they have the money to maintain their vehicles? So, credit standing. We're going to want to know about their driver screening, their training provisions. As we said before, drivers are the primary exposure. How are they qualifying them? Who are they being selected? We want to select those entities, and most carriers do, that have above average. So, what are they doing to make sure they're doing the best they can, bringing in those people that fit their qualifications? What are they doing in ongoing training? How are they monitoring them? Maintenance programs. We're going to want to know about their maintenance programs. Okay, we had a major accident here 2 days ago. Killed 3 people. One of the things they're going to look at is did that, there was quote unquote no brakes, no skid marks. Did the guy was his brakes good or not? They're going to look at maintenance program. What are you doing to maintaining that you're meeting the requirement to the motoring public to put safe vehicles on the road? Maintenance programs. They're going to want to know about all of that. That's providing them with the information they need. Do not, there is an old adage, TMI, too much information. Give the underwriter what they need based upon the application. If they want additional information, they'll ask for it based upon what you've asked. But give them what they need to provide to do their job. Some of the ideas, some of the areas that you're going to talk about with the ISO. From the ISO rating criteria, if you're using business auto, if you're using the ISO motor carriers form, the vast majority of what you're going to use are going to be utilizing this type of ISO rating criteria. Fleet or non-fleet, that has to do with the number of units, number of tractors. Less than 6, it's referred to as non-fleet. Anything 6 and over, quote unquote, for the ISO qualifies for fleet rating. Size, we're talking about the class 7, 8 vehicles, the size of the trucks or the vehicles that are transporting the freight, as opposed to a oversized dually pickup truck. You have your straight trucks, then you have your class 7 and 8 vehicles. Heavy, extra heavy tractor trailers, that's what we're talking about when we talk about size, classification. So fleet or non-fleet, size of the unit, business use. Is it retail? Is it service? Is it delivery? What is it being used for? For those folks that utilize and are familiar with the ISO Business Auto, in a lot of ways, we haven't changed a lot there. We've thrown some things in, but this is, to a great degree, the same type of criteria. Back to this, remember we talked about radius of operations and ISO's radius. You have different criteria based upon how far you're involved, how far that average length of one-way haul is, that radius of operations. Radius of operation is a rating criteria. Different carriers will have different breakdowns of what's short haul, what's medium, what's long haul. But radius of operations. Zone rating. A lot of your carriers now, if you have, especially if you're involved, remember the term truckload? You know, pick up and drop off in the same place. If you're hauling from, let's say you're involved in the operation, you're hauling autos. Okay, so you pick them up in South Carolina and haul them to LA. That's a long way. Okay, it may not be always the same one. So what they've done in such situations, they'll refer to as, we are going to zone rate you, which means we're going to figure out where you're hauling it to. Because a lot of these truck lines may pick up in South Carolina, they may pick it up in Texas, depending upon the type of commodities. But where they're hauling it to, once again, provides an exposure. Larger metropolitan areas where you've got an awful lot of people, an awful lot of cars, present an additional exposure. So in some scenarios, they don't rate on radius of operations. They're going to rate on where you're hauling the freight. I guarantee if you're hauling it to Columbus, Indiana, as opposed to Atlanta, Georgia, it may be the same distance one way, but if you're hauling it into Atlanta, you're going to get rated higher than hauling it to Columbus, Indiana, because of the concentration of individuals in that large metropolitan area, the exposures that's associated with that. So, ISO rating criteria, all those factor in. Okay. We're ready for another poll, believe it or not.
Okay. Charles, let's open up the next question. Launch. For those of you who are appointed agents with Protective Insurance, Charles just talked about some of the submission requirements and some of the things that you would include in an application for the underwriter. So if you were to submit business to Protective Insurance Company, and understanding what our appetite is, where would you find Protective's product appetite guides and our minimum submission requirements? Please choose the best answer. Where would you find our product guides, which include our appetite and our minimum submission requirements? We're going to be ending this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So, results.
For those folks that answered it incorrectly, there will be a phone call from the fine executive shortly.
90%. So there was a small percentage of people that were incorrect, but 90% chose C. And that is what we call our Protective Agent Portal, which if you go to protectiveinsurance.com, click on Agents in the upper right-hand corner and use your login credentials, you're able to access all of our applications, our product guides, and even some recorded training sessions, again, for all of our appointed agents and producers. All right, Charlie, thank you. Let's move on.
Okay. We're going to talk right now. This is what we're going to talk about now is the ISO Motor Carrier Form. We're going to go through some of the highlights of the definitions in some areas that you're going to need to understand. We're going to probably go quickly through some of the areas that, in some situations, if you've had any experience with the ISO Business Auto Policy, it's very similar. Matter of fact, it's exactly the same thing. So, okay. We're going to talk about these forms. The ISO Motor Carriers Form. We're not going to get into these details, but we're going to talk about these. These are some of the endorsements that we're going to talk about. ISO Motor Truck Cargo, your recorded certificate of insurance, which is nothing more than evidence of insurance at that specific date and time. And then some of your common endorsements. But we're going to talk primarily on the ISO Motor Carrier Form. Much like your other ISO policies, exactly like the business auto, you're going to have this breakdown. Covered auto, section 1. Section 2 is going to define your liability coverages, your third-party liability coverages. This is where you're going to start to see some deviation, or this is going to differ from the business auto. Section 3, trailer interchange coverage. Ain't on the business auto. Not there. Section 4, physical damage. Section 5, motor carrier conditions. Motor carrier conditions. And number 5 is, 6 is definitions. The difference between the business auto and the motor carriers form has to do with cargo and trailer interchange coverage. Those are the items that are added to the motor carrier form that make it different than the ISO business auto. So if you're used to writing the business auto, you're going to find a lot of commonality here. Okay. Section 1, symbols. The ISO policy is built on symbols. You put these in the deck page, and those symbols indicate what vehicles are covered. And you can mix and match these based upon liability, physical damage, uninsured motorist, or whatever. Okay. Section 1. And for those folks that have written business auto, just put your hand over the 6. And that's what you got. 61, any auto. Remember the definition of auto: land motor vehicle, trailer, semi-trailer, anything required, anything that's got a plate on it. Any auto. 62, owned autos only. Item 63, owned private passenger types only. 64, owned autos other than private passenger. 65, owned autos subject to no fault. If you happen to have an entity that is from the Commonwealth of Kentucky to our south, or the Maize and Blue Territory to our north, those are no-fault states. Those vehicles that are registered in those states are subject to no fault. 66, owned autos subject to compulsory uninsured motorists. 67, specifically described vehicles. In order for coverage to be there, they've got to be on the deck page and a premium shown. 68, hired autos only. 69, this is where we start to get into the difference between the motor carriers form and the ISO business auto. 69 and 70. 69, trailers in your possession under a written trailer interchange agreement. Symbol 70 is your trailers in somebody else's possession under a written trailer interchange agreement. 71, non-autos. 79, motor vehicle, mobile equipment subject to a compulsory MVR law. These two, 79 and 60, you'll only find in the ISO motor carrier. You will not find those in the business auto. You can jump up here. So, 19, and what is it on the, what's the non-owned under the business auto?
Non-owned is 9. It's 8.
9, probably 9, and that's 19 under the business auto. So, okay. So, Section 1 defines the limit, defines what vehicles are to be identified by that coverage code. Okay. And like I said, you can have 61 on any auto is liability only. You may have 67 on physical damage. You can mix and match. Okay. Section 1, we talked about before. We're still talking about the autos and the liability. Owned autos acquired after the policy begins, 61 to 66 and 79. Hey, started the policy August 1st, or started the policy June 1st. On July 16th, you acquired 50 more trucks. If you got 61, 66, or 79, guess what? You got automatic coverage, and you don't have to tell anybody about it. I recommend that you do, but you don't have to by the coverage, because based upon the definition of that symbol, you have automatic coverage. If you have symbol 67, as I said before, there's no coverage unless the vehicle is listed and a premium shown. Certain trailers and mobile equipment and temporary substitutes have automatic coverage. Temporary substitute, definition for those folks that haven't dealt with this in the past, temporary substitute. It's exactly the same thing you will have on your personal auto. Temporary substitute. Liability coverage for those entities, for that vehicle that is down due to maintenance, destruction, maintenance loss or damage or destruction. If that thing is out of service due to that, and you rent a car, it becomes a temporary substitute and has the same liability coverage as the vehicle it replaced. Okay. Section 1, liability. Okay, Section 2, we're talking about the coverage agreement now and the liability under the ISO motor carriers form. In most of your ISO policies, you will always find this. there is a duty to defend and a duty to pay damages. Under the ISO Motor Carriers Form, you have a duty to defend the insured whether they are guilty or not. Duty to defend outweighs the duty to pay. The duty to defend, regardless whether that insured may be found liable or not, you have a duty to defend. You have a duty to pay damages only if they have been found legally liable. Only if they've been found legally liable. A lot of times you'll see a loss run, you see zero pay, you see $100,000 in expense. The expense was the duty to defend. The zero and the amount lost paid is zero damages. We won the court case. So, duty to pay only applies when they've been found liable. The nice thing about the ISO Motor Carriers Form, and this is a change of this has been going on maybe about 12 years, 10 years now. A duty to pay covered pollution, cost, and expense. This is what this is talking about. Pollution is excluded within any ISO policy. It's excluded. The ISO Motor Carriers Form, with the exception of this. If you've ever driven down the road and you see a tractor trailer involved in a jackknife, everybody knows what the jackknife is, where you've got the trailer and the truck up against it like this. The thing that usually happens, you get a ruptured gas tank, right? You got diesel fuel everywhere. The cost for cleaning up the diesel fuel, okay, and the cost of, if you get a rollover tractor, the stuff of cleaning up all that stuff, the oil and the stuff that leaks out of the truck because it's upside down, that is defined as covered pollution, cost, and expense. That's the one unendorsed coverage where you will get some of your pollution coverage back. Only in that scenario. Only in that scenario. Covered pollution, cost, and expense is built into the ISO Motor Carriers Form. Okay? So, coverage agreement, duty to pay damages that the insured is liable for, the duty to defend, and you have a duty to pay covered pollution, cost, and expense. All right, we're going to talk about liability. The one thing you'll find out about the ISO Motor Carriers Form is the same as you will have on any ISO form. Every section we're going to talk about has its own definition of insureds and its own exclusions and its own conditions. And there's a gentleman once told me one time, the reason he reads policies in depth, he wants to know what the bold-faced language means, so he knows when he's starting to talk to somebody, so he knows the terms and definitions. He wants to know what the conditions are, so he knows what he has to do, his agency has to do, and the insured has to do to keep the coverage enforced. And he wants to read all the exclusions because he has one very basic premise. If it ain't specifically excluded, it's covered. And if you ever want to have fun, you ever want to play games with them, as a brand new claims adjuster, and they go through this whole litany of all this stuff, and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's denied." Ask them to show you the exclusion. That's kind of mean, because I always used to swear that sometimes I think most claims adjusters that come into the industry, the first word that they're ever trained on is denied. So, but we're going to talk about that. First one here, who's an insured? Under the liability policy, obviously the named insured or insured. The first named insured is the person whose name's on the deck page. The ISO Motor Carriers Form, you can have additional named insureds. Well, those entities that are additional named insureds have the same coverage as the person whose name's on the deck page. Named insureds automatically are covered. Anyone other than the named insured using the auto with permission. Independent contractors or company drivers driving that truck, they're covered, they're an insured. Except the owner or anyone else from whom the named insured hires or borrows a covered auto. Hey, I leased the vehicle from Ryder. Ryder's not automatically covered. So, you have to add them. An employee of the named insured, the covered auto is owned by the employee. Okay? Any person using a covered auto while in the business of selling, servicing, repairing, or parking autos, unless that business belongs to the insured. Okay? But those are the only exceptions to anyone else other than the named insured using an auto with their permission. They're an insured under the liability section of the ISO Motor Carriers Form. Liability coverage extensions. These are throw-ins. Same thing you got on the business auto. All expenses the insurance company incurs in defense of the claim. This is the reason why sometimes you will get insurers that will go, "Hey, it wasn't my fault, but you paid the claim anyway." Well, sometimes it gets to a situation of I've got a $50,000 claim. I can spend $100,000 defending it, or I can pay $10,000 and make it go away. Under the ISO Motor Carriers Form, the decision lies with the insurance company. In exchange for the premium, the insurer doesn't have a dog in the fight. Okay? For first-party liability, that responsibility, that decision lies with the insurance company. Any expenses the insurer incurs in defense belongs to the insurance company. It does not affect the limits. Up to $2,000 in bail bonds. Reasonable expenses the insured may incur at our request. All costs taxed to the insurer in a suit that the insurance company defends, and all interest accruing after the entry of a judgment against the insured. That's pre-judgment interest and post-judgment interest. All that are coverage extensions outside of the limits of liability within the ISO Motor Carriers Form. Same thing you got in the business auto. Okay, here's the good stuff. This is the stuff that ain't covered. Okay. Expected or intended injury from the standpoint of the claimant. Excuse me, from the standpoint of the insured. It's never expected or intended from the standpoint of the claimant. Expected or intended injury from the standpoint of the insured. Contractual liability, except if that liability is assumed under what we refer to as a covered insurance contract. And we'll get to that a little later. Workers' comp and employer's liability, that's better covered someplace else. So there is no third-party liability for that. It's better covered under workers' comp or employer's liability. Fellow employee, once again, back to the workers' comp. Stuff under the care, custody, and control of the insured. What are we talking about? We're talking about cargo. It's better covered there as opposed to third-party liability. Handling of property or movement of property by mechanical device with a couple of minor exceptions that is excluded under the auto liability is better covered under the general liability, under a GL policy. Operations, completed operations, remember we talked about earlier, the general liability, that's why you added it, because it's excluded here. It's excluded under the AL. Pollution. Well, we just gave that away a little bit ago, right, with the covered cost and pollution expense. That's the exception. Pollution here is excluded. War and racing, all those are third-party exclusions under liability. Okay. Section 3, trailer interchange, which we have in the ISO Motor Carriers Forms, not in the business auto. Remember we talked about trailer interchange. This is trailers under your care, custody, and control through a written trailer interchange or equipment interchange agreement. Much like liability, you have to be found legally liable for damages to that. You can have either comprehensive coverage or specified causes of loss and collision. Those are the coverages. And you have a duty to defend, much like liability. This is the reason why some carriers will look at this as a liability coverage as opposed to a physical damage coverage. Because it's kind of a mix and match. You have to be legally liable, and you have a duty to defend like liability, but you have the coverages for physical damage. Usually these are situations where we have a specific limit based upon average value that may fall into that. Depending upon your operation, this becomes a must-have. If you're involved in intermodal operations, if your client doing the checklist, hey, this is an intermodal operation, they run in and out of the docks. You're going to get involved with something referred to as the Uniform Intermodal Interchange Agreement Form, UIIA. It's all about that. So once again, you find some of this stuff out and understand some of the coverages you're going to be required to have by talking to your clients or your prospects. Okay, trailer interchange. Exclusions, loss of use, wear and tear, normal wear and tear, damage, road damage to tires, except in the case of a total loss or theft loss, are excluded. Nuclear and war, all those are exclusions. You see a lot of these things. Those are liability exclusions. Those are physical damage exclusions. Once again, you have a mix and match. But this is specific only to the trailer interchange coverage. What? Okay. Limits under trailer interchange. Actual cash value cost to repair or replace, or the limit that may be shown on the individual deck page. All right. We've talked about liability. We've talked about physical damage. We've talked about trailer interchange. Physical damage, first party stuff. We will pay for loss to a covered auto under comprehensive or specified causes of loss and collision. Comprehensive, those folks that deal with the personal line side, or may have an opportunity there, you don't see specified causes of loss. What you have there, you may understand down on the personal line side, is you only have two types of physical damage coverage under the personal line side: collision and other than collision, what they refer to now as comp. The key is that specified causes of loss, we're only paying if the loss is a result of one of a short list of items. If it's comprehensive, that means we're going to pay unless you prove that it's not covered. Physical damage, it has to be of a covered auto. Towing, for private passenger types only. That is for towing coverage that has to be towing and loss of use or transportation expenses are private passenger types only. It has to be included and only applies to those vehicles, private passenger types, if they're towing and roadside assistance takes place at the site of disablement. Okay, physical damage coverage. First party, this is your stuff. Okay, exclusions under physical damage. Remember, every single section has different exclusions. Nuclear hazard, war, military action, excluded. Wear and tear, freezing, mechanical or electrical breakdown, or road damage to tires, except in the case of a theft. Tapes, records, CDs, or audio, visual, or data electronic equipment. And guess what? We have an exception to the exclusion, which we're going to talk about. This is a give back. This has been a recent change, which is reflective of the changes in technology in the industry. Speed measuring or jamming equipment is excluded. I don't know, these people have no common sense at all. So you got a radar detector. It's not going to be covered not going to be covered for your physical damage. And probably by the time you got it installed, the state police has got something better anyway. So, one thing I want to bring up in regards to first-party physical damage under the ISO Motor Carriers Form, you have an exclusion for diminished value on first-party claims. Diminished value is not recognized as an insurable exposure except in one state. Only one state has recognized diminished value as an insurable exposure. The lovely state of Georgia. Insurance from anywhere else, excluded. And this is first party only. It has nothing to do with third party liability. This is first party coverages only we're talking about. Okay. Remember I talked about the tape, record, CDs, audio, visual are excluded. With the exception of, and this is a recent change to the ISO Motor Carriers Form. Those are excluded. Exceptions will cover equipment and its accessories operated solely powered by the auto's electrical system if, once again, and this is an and, if they are permanently installed in a covered auto or removable from a permanently installed housing unit or an integral part of the same housing unit or necessary for the auto's normal operation or monitoring the operating system. This speaks to the advances in technology. OnStar, telematics, all those items which have now been built into most of your tractor trailers, sometimes can be some of the most expensive parts of the truck. So, if it meets these qualifications, that exclusion no longer applies. This is a give back to some of your motor carriers to reflect the changes in the value of units and advances in technology. Okay, physical damage, normally actual cash value. Cost me minus depreciation. Cost to repair or replace. Sometimes you may have a stated value endorsement, which means you're going to get the maximum value in the case of a total loss of the limits that are shown on the deck page. The key in the physical damage, there is no betterment. You will not do yourself a favor and actually put yourself in a better position by being involved in a loss in the first party physical damage. I've had a number of arguments with agents that are going, you know what, my insured had a wreck, and he had to buy new tires, but then you only paid him half the cost. Well, you ask him, how many miles do they normally put on a set of tires? And he goes, you guys are maybe 75,000, 80,000. How many miles were on the truck when he totaled it? Yeah, about 40. And I always come back, I'm sorry, I don't know of any dealership that sells used tires that have already got 40,000 miles on it. So, you're not going to be putting yourself in a better position. It gets back to the theory of indemnification, which insurance is built on. Where the idea is to put you back in exactly like you were in the position you were right before the loss. Not any better, not any worse. So, no betterment for physical damage. Loss conditions for physical damage. If you disagree with what we say is the actual cash value, within the contract, there is a criteria that you can set up an appraisal to meet a compromise in regards to the actual cash value of the loss. Duties in the event of a loss, that's protected from further damage. There can be no action taken against the insurance company unless the insured has met all the criteria and all the terms of the contract. Okay, we've had this conversation with a couple of other people. Loss payment, physical damage coverages. If you have a lien holder, okay, and your insured does something to invalidate their interest in the physical damage unit, but they have a lien holder on it. Example: I burned the truck. I'm behind my payments and I torched it. Okay, guess what? They're not going to get paid if we know it got torched, but the person that is going to get paid is going to be the lien holder. Loss payment, physical damage coverages. The interest of that secured creditor will always be protected. Transfer of rights against others, subrogation. We always reserve the right to subrogate back if our insured, if we pay damages based upon the proximate cause of loss to somebody other than our insured. We reserve the right to go back and try to collect those payments we've made to that insured. Okay. General conditions. Bankruptcy, and we're not talking about the insurance company, we're talking about bankruptcy of the insured. If the insured continues to make the payment as scheduled until the policy renews, contract's still in place. Concealment, misrepresentation, or fraud of a material fact will result in rescission of the coverage. Material fact is the definition of material fact is if something that the underwriter knew that actually existed the way it really was, that A, rate would have been different, or B, we wouldn't have been insured silly thing to begin with. And it has to be concealment, misrepresentation, or fraud. It has to be done with intent. Example would be, I transposed the numbers on the VIN number. That's an oops, as opposed to I just didn't bother to tell you about the car at all. That's done with intent. That's the difference. Liberalization. The ISO Motor Carriers Form indicates if you are driving in a state which has requirements that are broader than you have in a contract, the policy automatically broadens coverage to meet those requirements. The example, everybody from Indiana drives south across the bridge into the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The minute you cross the bridge and get on the other side of the bridge, you have no fault coverage under the ISO Motor Carriers Form, because that's required in the state automatically with no extra charge. No benefit to the Bailey for property damage. Other insurance. This contract will be always excess above others. Okay? This will always be excess above others. Premium audit. Much like anything that's on a reporting form, at the end of the day, we reserve the right to conduct a premium audit after the policy is renewed or the policy is terminated to make sure that you pay for what you used and you don't pay for what you didn't use. Policy coverage and territory. Well, I turned that off. Policy coverage and territory, excuse me. Sorry, folks. But I turned that off. Won't go away. Policy coverage and territory. This is the ISO Motor Carriers Form. Canada, U.S., territories, nothing south of the border. There's no Mexican coverage within that. Policy period normally 1 year in duration. This is the thing where sometimes we get hung up on. Two or more coverage forms or policies issued by the same insurer. If you have two policies that are both issued by the same insurance company or one of the same group, and both of those policies apply, the higher limits is only you do not stack them. You only have one policy, you only have one limit to go, and it's the higher of the policies. So we have, let's say, for lack of a better term, we have two policies issued by, let's say, one of the AIG companies. One's for $1 million, one's for $5 million. Okay, both of them are applicable to the loss. You have $5 million to play with, and that's it. As opposed to a $5 million policy from AIG and a $3 million policy from Progressive. There, you got $8 million to play with. You can stack them. That's the difference from this policy. You are limiting the exposure from issuing multiple policies issued by the same carrier. Okay. Definitions real quick. We talked about auto before. Does not include mobile equipment. Accident, continuous or reported exposure to the same conditions resulting in bodily injury or property damage. Bodily injury, sickness, death resulting from any. We talked about covered pollution, cost, and expense. Page 12 of the ISO Motor Carriers Form. Diminished value, we spoke about that earlier. Not covered under first-party physical damage. Third-party property damage, it's a subject, it's open to debate. Insured, any person or organization qualifying as an insured under the who is an insured provision of that applicable coverage. Uninsured motorist, and then by endorsement. Physical damage, trailer interchange. Insured, as we said before, any person or organization qualifying as an insured under that applicable section. Loss, a direct and accidental loss or damage. Mobile equipment, page 13 and 14 of the form is identified. Property damage, damage to or loss of tangible property, stuff you can touch. Trailer, we talked about before. Semi-trailer or dolly used to convert a trailer into a semi-trailer. Some of the normal endorsements that you will see accompanying an ISO Motor Carriers Form. Motor truck cargo endorsement. Your IH 7209. This is what you get a lot of times added to an ISO Motor Carriers Form to provide property coverage for cargo that you're being transported in your care, custody, and control. Record certificate of insurance. This is evidence of insurance at this date and time, a snapshot. Pollution liability, broad and covered, 9948. You will get asked for this a lot. If you're hauling cargo, they want to have this. This has almost gotten to be a standard endorsement added to most motor carriers forms. And then uninsured motorists and PIP endorsements will vary by state because those are state mandated forms. So those will vary by the state in which they are applicable. Okay, poll number 4.
Great, everybody. We're launching poll number 4. On your screen, please select your answer. What coverage is addressed as part of the unendorsed ISO Motor Carrier Form? Please select one. Begin your voting now. I'm going to be closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Everybody votes in?
And the results are?
We have 59% of the people chose all of the above.
Okay. That is correct. 59%. Trailer auto liability in the ISO Motor Carriers Form. Trailer interchange, Section 3. Physical damage, Section 4 of the ISO Motor Carriers Form. All those are built into the policy. Anything other than that, got to add by endorsement. The unendorsed provides third-party auto liability, trailer interchange, physical damage, first part of it. Okay. We're going to talk about some of the current industry issues right now. We're going to go through these, not in great detail, but some of the things that if you're talking to an underwriter or you're talking to an agent that deals in the transportation industry, or better yet, a suspect or a prospect or even insured, these are topics that are going to come up. The American Transportation Research Association, these are the top 10 industry issues, and they update these annually. Number 1, driver shortage. There are not enough bodies to put in the seats. That's a problem. The average age of a CDL Class A driver, I believe, the average age is about 56, 57 years old. That's the average. That's the reason why, one of the reasons you'll see that I can remember going down the road, and you see, usually everybody's seen the back end of the tractor trailer says we pay X number of cents a mile. I can remember that when it was 19 cents a mile. Now I'm seeing it 59, 60 cents a mile. That's because they have had to increase the wages offered because of the shortage of drivers to entice people to get into this part of the industry. Driver shortage, ELD mandate, electronic logs. Get away with paper logs, electronic logs mandate. Getting these instituted, and I think, isn't this supposed to be by the end of this year that all those people have to have? What that is by the end of 2019, everybody involved in interstate commerce that has a commercial driver's license must have an electronic log installed into their truck, which is going to track how many hours how many hours of service they have, what they've done. Because this is, once again, safety being a primary concern, this is one of the areas of strict enforcement from the Department of Transportation. We just talked about hours of service. It's restricting them, increasing them. They've also mandated sometimes that you have to have certain hours, certain times you have to sleep, which unfortunately, the net effect has been putting more tractor trailers on the road right in the middle of rush hour in the morning. But that's something that they're working through. But hours of service. Truck parking. There's no place to park these silly things when they have to park them because of the hours of service. The limitation of potential truck parking spots is getting to be, in certain parts of the country, one of the more primary and pressing issues. You can't get them hired, you can't keep them. Driver retention. Once again, back to the drivers. How do I keep them on board? What do I do? What can I give them to keep them on board? It's the same thing we have in any industry. We have employee retention, where it becomes an issue. Driver turnover is a huge issue. One of the problems is when you've got a lower number of people coming into the industry, what do all your motor carriers do? They steal from each other. So from a motor carrier standpoint, how do you keep them home? What are the issues? What can I offer to make it more enjoyable to work for my motor carrier than yours? Okay. CSA. Once again, we talked about before. This is your safety accountability. We're going to talk about something in a little bit. This has been a great idea implemented. We have issues with implementation. We continue to have issues with implementation. So this is something that has been continued brought up based upon the motor carriers, based upon the enforcement of that has not been consistent across the board. So that's presented issues for the motor carrier industry. Regulations. Example being the state of California. You have to have certified units that, quote unquote, meet the pollution requirements for operating in the state of California. And it's above and beyond what you would have in any other state. Anybody driven around Indianapolis with check holes, potholes? Infrastructure, congestion. That becomes an issue. Certain parts of the United States, certain parts of large metropolitan areas are well known for gridlock. And that's what we're talking about. And then driver health and wellness. The issues with the driver force. Making sure that what we can do to make these individuals more healthy, wellness, and once again, it leads to an increase in driver retention and an increase in the potential of bringing new people into the industry. These are the top 10 industry issues that came out from AFTRI this year. As I said, these are updated every year. These top 2 or 3 pretty much stay there. They may flip order, but those top 3 or 4 have always been there. We talked about CSA a little earlier. Compliance, safety, and accountability. Grades carrier on each basic measurement compared to their peer group. Great idea in implementation. We're going to measure how good they are. The problem has been the implementation. Depending upon their score, you may get the DOT knocking at your door. Intervention determined by their score, meaning if the satisfactory, conditional, or not rated under the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Almost every contract I see come across my desk is got to be that. Got to be satisfactory. If you have a conditional rating or an unsatisfactory conditional rating, will have a direct impact on that motor carrier doing business. Also, now we're grading the drivers because we know that the drivers have a direct impact on here. Includes inspections, selection, service flag for mandatory roadside assistance. If you have fallen out of line with your CSA scores, your basic 7 measurements, you will be flagged and you will have more opportunities to have your vehicles inspected than somebody who has a clean bill of health. The 7 basics we're going to look at: unsafe driving, that's your moving violations; hours of service compliance; driver fitness; controlled substance, alcohol abuse; vehicle maintenance, cargo; hazardous materials, crashes. These top 6 are viewable for the public. 7's not. Okay. These are the 7 basics, and they're measured against their peer group. Much like those folks that play golf, the lower the score, the better, because you have thresholds at every one of these basics. And the motor carriers are graded on how they stack up against that threshold. They're measured against everybody else in their peer group. So, how you stack up in that 7 will have an impact on the operations of that motor carrier. As I said before, there have been some issues with the implementation. So in 2019, we're coming up with a new response theory. Looking at, as I said, many motor carriers, it's unfair and inaccurate. If you're in Indiana, you're going to get dinged more than you are in Ohio, just because of who does the roadside inspections. So the idea is to identify high-risk carriers and predict future crash indicators. They're going to come up with a new measurement which weights are assigned to particular violations. We're going to include a safety culture assessment. This is being implemented in 2019 to be a new methodology to measure those drivers, as opposed to the 7 basics that, hey, if I do it in California, because they have an emphasis on vehicle maintenance, then I may not get inspected I may never get inspected anywhere else. So it skews the potential in that basic. So current issues that's being implemented now, hopefully, to level the playing field and make the CSA scores more reflective of the safety culture of that motor carrier. Looking toward the future, we said for the industry, significant increase in both. How many people have bought stuff from Amazon? Significant increase in retail and online sales. We can't keep up. They're coming up now. I'm saying Amazon is having stuff delivered in private passenger autos because they don't have enough trucks to deliver. We talked about before technology, adaptive telematics, and collision avoidance. All those are being added to the newer vehicles coming out with the idea of making it a safer operation. The problem is that same vehicle 5 years ago cost $150,000. With all the stuff that we're needing to add onto it now, stuff coming off the line from Volvo, or some of the new trucks are now running $200,000 a piece. It becomes becomes a hurdle meeting those requirements. As we talk about from the insurance standpoint, what we refer to as nuclear verdicts. Litigation has taken to the point now where we see a number of liability verdicts that are in excess of $10 million. It's not that the individual, but a lot of these things are being enforced by attorneys, litigation firms, premium financing groups that are financing claimants and telling them to go out and do this, driving up the cost of litigation. But it took 1.5 years to close a claim 5 years ago. That now takes 2.5 years to get that same type of claim closed. And what that does, the longer they're open, the more money it's going to cost. So we've seen an increase in those nuclear verdicts from an insurance standpoint in the transportation industry. A lot of carriers, insurance carriers, have opted out of the transportation industry just because of that. The increase in the number of what we refer to as nuclear verdicts. Last time, please, we're going to touch on this just real briefly, and then we'll be done with it. Property brokers. Most of your carriers may have ability to be a property broker as well, separate than the ISO motor carriers form. Security bond requirements. They have a security bond, BMC 84. If they're going to broker that, remember we talked about the 100 and 120 loads. They're going to broker it out. They have to have broker's authority, and they have to have a separate broker's authority, separate under a motor carrier number, and we have additional requirements involved in this if you have an entity that has a brokerage authority in conjunction with their common carrier or contract carrier's authority. Resources to go to check on them, check on motor carriers, CAB, Central Analysis Bureau. Company websites, go pull up the motor carriers you're looking at, pull up their websites. They're going to tell you everything they're doing, or they want to do. FMCSA filings, you go online to SAFER, and it'll tell you what is the required limits of liability. It will tell you how many units they're running. It'll tell you what kind of cargo they're hauling. AM Best underwriting, loss control reports that may be presented internally or externally can give you an idea in regards to that particular motor carrier. Summary: we want to know their business. Understand the challenges. Be a little emphatic. They don't have the easiest job in the world. Technical knowledge is important, but relationships matter. Take time to participate in industry events and local trucking associations. Be involved. Find an opportunity to get inside of a cab of a truck. You'd be surprised. And go to a roadside inspection. You'd be surprised at some of the stuff that they go through. And with that, back to Mr. Carey.
Great. Thanks, Charles. So we do have a few questions, and then what we'll do is we'll scroll through some of the photos that we have at the end for the conclusion of the webinar. First question is, someone had a question about the fuel leak would be covered without having to add pollution coverage?
The description I had with in the case of a Jaguar, cost and pollution expense, or damage or property damage in regard to the cleanup in regards to the may result from the loss of fuels or lubricants used in the operation of a motor vehicle. As we said before, a ruptured fuel tank in regards to a jackknife. It's an accident where that fuel leak would be that diesel fuel escapes from that tractor trailer in regards to a covered loss. In that case, that would be covered under pollution cost and expense. If it's pollution from stuff that they're hauling, no can do. That is excluded. It has to do with the escape of pollutants or lubricants used in the operation of the motor vehicle involved in the accident. Very limited.
Great. Next question. And this is a great one. Why do nuclear verdicts matter when usually there's a limit of liability for insurance, like $1 million or $3 million or $5 million?
I don't know who asked that question, but thank you.
Yeah.
Here you go. And it's funny because we just had that conversation. Insurance 101. Okay, you're transferring the exposure. In exchange for premium, we're going to protect you up to $1 million. Okay? Granted. But the responsibility for damages that you may be found liable to, at the end of the day, falls to the insurer, falls to the person transferring the exposure. So, motor carrier, you buy $1 million, and you're going to have people tell you, what are they going to do, sue me for $4 million? Oh, absolutely. They could sue you for $50 million. The insurance company writes the check for the $1 million and walks away. The other $49 million is coming out of your bottom line. So that is a true statement. That if nuclear verdicts, all that does is that's saying that these are the responsibility which you have been found legally liable for. The fact that you don't have enough insurance to cover it does not release you from the liability associated with that. Therefore, the motor carrier is going to pay for anything above the insurance cost. And that's one reason why, if you ever talk to a client and they give you that line, well, they're not going to sue you for more than insurance. They're absolutely wrong. Depends upon how good the attorney is in front of the court or the extent of the damages. They can come back and basically take that truck line away.
And then the punitive.
And the punitive damages on top of it. One of the biggest claims we've had recently was it was almost a $90 million claim out of Texas, of which about $75 million of it was punitive damages. So they're going to go back to the truck line. They were insured, I think they had 10, so they got 10 and 5 the other. Everything's going back to the truck line for the balance of those.
Okay, looks like we have 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up. Does the insured need a trailer interchange agreement in place for coverage to apply?
For coverage to apply, it has to be a trailer interchange or an equipment interchange agreement. Because that should set the terms for who's responsible for what. For coverage to apply, if it's on the deck page, it assumes that one exists. Strongly recommend that they get one. Some type of trailer interchange or equipment interchange agreement.
Okay, last question. Do you think the Fed will ever increase the requirements? So, for example, it's $750 or $1 million. Do you think they'd ever bump it up to 2 or more?
I think at some point that you will see the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration raise the minimum limits. I agree with that. I think you will see, because of the Cypress verdict, nothing else, inflation, that hasn't been raised in probably 40 years. So in that regard, I strongly experience, which has been brought up once or twice in the last 5 years, of raising the minimum requirements from the current levels of the FMCSA.
Great. Charles, thank you very much for your time. This ends our webinar. Please make sure, if you want credit in the 4 states that we listed at the beginning, that you send your state and your license number. And as soon as I end the webinar, a survey will come up. Please tell us how we did and what we can do to improve our next session. Everyone, thank you very much. Charlie?
I think that's it. If you want to, for those folks who want to sit for a minute or two, I'll run through the appendix.
Okay. Yep.
Real quick, here's some of the pictures we talked about. Definition of inside of the cab, dry van, box van. We talked about for doubles, two tractors, two rig trailers. This is the flatbed. Fifth wheel, hazmat placard. These can mean a number of different things to individuals depending upon what they're hauling. Definition of a hot shot intermodal, and I think everybody's probably seen one of those type of containers. Landing gear, low boy, pup trailer, reefer van. You always see the temperature control unit up front. Straight truck, a trucking terminal. Some of the terminology that you'll see utilized either on an application or in conversation in regards to somebody in the motor carrier industry. With that, thank you, folks.
Thank you all very much. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.